Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Oregon. I'm your host, Mike Ducett, and on today's show we have two returning guests with us. We have both Martin Shanks, Village Administrator, and Village President Phil Van Kampen to discuss the upcoming referendum that will be on the April ballot. So this episode is all about learning more about what that referendum is and how to maybe make your best informed decision. So welcome to the show, guys. Thank you for being here and taking the time to explain all this to us.
Thank you for the opportunity today.
So, for our viewers that may still not be aware of this upcoming referendum and the ballot in April, can you kind of explain the current situation that has led to the need for this referendum?
Well, the short answer really is growth and inflation. So the village has had significant growth over the last 10 years. In fact, we've doubled in population since 2000. And as the village grows, of course, additional revenues are needed to support that growth. We're limited by state statute to about a 2% increase in our levy each year. But in the past few years, we've had inflation levels, Mike, of 8 and 9%. And I think residents can understand that at that level, 2% is just really not going to pay the bills. So we've decided to ask the voters to give approval for the village to exceed the statutory limit of the property taxes so that we can continue to maintain the village and clean it and keep it the clean, safe community that we know.
Right, and this amount, I think you're asking for $1.95 million, will be a recurring referendum, correct?
Well,
so it's assessed every year, not just a one-time assessment.
It's a one-time increase.
Okay.
Yes, it does not compound each year.
Okay.
So if your taxes were to go up $400 or $500 this year, that will be the same amount next year. It will not
continue
compound.
to increase. Okay, good. It's good to get that out there. So as you said in the your opening statement here, that the village is growing. I think everybody recognized that. We see the new growth in some of the apartments and the developments coming in. Also, we see the new homes being built on the west side of the village as well in those new neighborhoods. So can you kind of detail what changes you've seen over the past few years in the Village of Oregon? And why has some of this growth and new construction really not increased the property tax funding that we have and the money that we would have access to fund the village? Martin, you want to handle this?
Sure, yeah. So for property taxes, for operational spending, so things that we need to do like pay our employees' wages, pay our utility bills, buy supplies, that sort of thing. We need to have a funding source that is reliable and consistent and that we can have every year. And so, of course, property tax is the primary source that we have. And the only way under state law that we can increase our property tax for that kind of spending is through what's known as net new construction. So as a community, you need to actually grow in new construction value in order to increase your property taxes. And so for the Village of Oregon, that has worked out fairly well for recent history. As Phil mentioned, we've had 2%, 3% increases to our property taxes for operational spending, which has been pretty sufficient, in previous times. But in the last couple of years, as Phil mentioned, we've had some pretty significant increases in inflation, 8, 9%, 5% over the last 3-4 years. And so in the past, where growth had the benefit of sort of helping the village stay on top of our costs, now costs are starting to even outrun our growth. And so that is really the driving reason behind why this referendum is needed. And so again, new construction value has been helpful, but it just isn't enough.
So for like thinking about like an analogy of the scale, right? The inflation is kind of tipping the scale downward, and versus having the equalized growth from the property taxes and that new construction. It's just that we're outpacing, and when we have more people moving to the village, we have more people using services. Is that correct? And so we're just not quite keeping pace like we should.
Correct.
All right. So I think, if you take some time to go to the Village of Oregon website, you'll find some very important information and really good, well thought out materials for you to peruse. I know you've done some mailings home to voters as well. So can you explain to us, how is that inflation worsening things beyond just outpacing that new growth percentage that grows? Like, what other areas do you see inflation, kind of making it harder for us to sustain the amount we have in our funding?
Yes. In 2022, the village undertook a study of staff wages and found that about half of our staff is being paid below market rates. So we'd like to get those people up to par. In addition, we would like to maintain our wage levels at a rate that we retain staff. We have excellent staff, many long-term staff members, and with that institutional knowledge that that many staff members bring to us, we'd like to retain that staff. And as we grow, that makes it easier to attract new staff members, talent.
And so, Martin, do you want to kind of explain, while anybody in the village can run to be on the village board and be a trustee within the village, right? We have very specialized people with very specialized degrees outside of the village board, like doing daily operations for the village. So do you want to maybe talk a little about like your experience and degree, maybe Elisa's experience and what she brings to that, and how it's kind of hard to find people with that specialized knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, across all of our departments, all of our staff, the types of work that we do is increasingly complex, increasingly needs more education, more ongoing professional education. And so, you have typical professional positions like administrator. As you mentioned, Elise, our director of community development, she is a professional urban planner. She has a master's degree in that. Our librarians have bachelor's and master's degrees. Those things are required for those types of positions. Even police officers, they need the police academy. They need a lot of ongoing professional certifications and that sort of thing. So, as Phil mentioned, having half of your workforce being below market rate compared to similar positions in similar communities, we have a lot of wonderful communities in Dane County. And if you're a public servant, a police officer, for example, who is looking for a job, you're going to look where you can make the most money and most benefits. And if we aren't offering that, we certainly don't have to be above the market or set the market. But if we're not competitive, we're going to miss out on some of that talent. Right. And at the end of the day, employees deliver services, right? So the quality of those employees is very important.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think some folks may lose sight of the fact of how wide that spreads. It's our police officers, it's our firemen. It's not only the village administrator or people working within the village hall, it's our maintenance crews, it's everybody, right? And I think there's a big umbrella there that a lot of people may not be aware of. So I think a concern that I've seen a lot about is those seniors in our community, right? Especially those who are in fixed incomes and are now kind of facing another increase on their property taxes. So are there ways that you think this referendum will actually benefit seniors as well, or are we fearing that we may be pricing some of these folks out of our village?
Well, certainly there's I'm personally very much aware, and the village board is aware of the impacts that may have on some of our seniors, and part of the discussion about reducing the referendum amount, certainly in seniors and the situation you described, is something we took into consideration. Unfortunately, we can't tax on a case-by-case basis and decide, well, for those that may have some difficulty, we have to tax uniformly. But it is troubling to me, but on the other hand, as an elected official, I think it's my responsibility to balance the budget and maintain the village.
And there is a process for folks who feel their home is being overvalued to dispute that. Is that correct? Like they can go through a process to say my home was appraised incorrectly, and that could lower the tax burden for some folks, maybe some of those seniors as well. Is that correct, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely. If as a property owner, if you felt that your assessment was incorrect, certainly you can contact the village assessor at any time. That information is out there on our village website, and you can contact Village Hall for that information too. So you can have those conversations with the assessor. There's also a formal process typically in the spring and summer called Open Book, where the village assessor is available and you can meet with them in person. and have those conversations. And if you don't feel like you're getting any satisfaction from that, there is the last resort, which is called Board of Review, and that typically meets in the summer. And you can go before a body that you can dispute your property assessment, and you have to produce evidence as to why you believe that, and that body will consider those claims and make a decision on that.
So there is a process for folks to follow. I think that's comforting to some folks to know that, if they're not really agreeing with their assessment, they can take a second look at that.
That's right.
So if this referendum passes in April, what are some of the first priorities that we're going to see in the village? What changes could we expect to see? And conversely, if it doesn't pass, what will those impacts be as well?
Well, I think I can cover the changes you can see, and that is the main thing is staffing. We would be adding 3 police officers, 3 public works workers, 2 full-time in the library, a human resources manager for the village, probably some part-time staff as well. In addition, we have facility maintenance, mowing, snow plowing, all services that are increasing. We have 10% increase in the number of streets, so that's that much more to maintain and take care of. So I think those are the kind of things that you can expect. And I think the village board will implement.
And so, Martin, if this doesn't pass, what would we might likely see as well?
Sure. Yeah, I think right now there isn't sort of a plan or anything that's been discussed by the village board in terms of what actions may need to be taken. But if it doesn't pass, we'll have to have a conversation and have some discussions amongst the board and certainly departments. And, it'll look like probably a few things. I think we'll have to examine what are our priorities. Are there certain services that we value more than maybe others? And in that case, is there, are we going to be shifting dollars? Are we going to be reducing some services? Are we going to be eliminating some services? Are there other options for additional revenue in terms of service charges or fees or that sort of thing? But, that might look like, maybe village facilities are closed. Maybe the library, the senior center, the village hall is closed 1-2 days a week, and staff have to be off. So all those things have to be on the plate at this point, and we'll have to have those conversations, and hopefully we'll have those conversations with residents as well, and decide what we need to do.
Yeah, that's really good information to know and to recognize. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with our second segment, and we'll still be tackling these tough questions about the referendum on April's ballot. Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Call him anything you like.
How about the time he had his house painted by the fire department?
Give him the word.
Uh-huh.
Hello, Duffy. Get set. We got the biggest story in years.
If you're my father, if you love me, you'll shoot him.
Well, I'm your father, and I sure love you. So?
Hey! He dies!
If he dies, he'll be the first man ever killed with a blank cartridge.
Clever fellow. Almost missed me.
You're blocking my view.
Which view would you prefer?
The one you're blocking. It's my last chance. I'm flying back to Paris this afternoon. What's your name?
Peter Joshua.
Oh, mine's Regina Lampert.
Is there Mr. Lampert?
Yes.
Good for you.
No, it isn't. I'm getting a divorce.
Thanks for watching OCA.
Thanks for watching OCA.
Thanks for watching OCA.
Hello, welcome back from our break. We're still here talking with Village President Phil Van Kampen and Village Administrator Martin Shanks, and we're here discussing important information about our referendum. So, according to the referendum materials that are posted on the website, a typical homeowner here in Oregon could expect about a $99 increase in their property taxes for about each $100,000 of home value. So if a person in the village has a home that's assessed for about $400,000, they'll see slightly over increase in their property tax about $400. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
So, and I think a thing that we talked about at the beginning of in our first segment was that this referendum is not really meant to go for big spending projects, right? We're not building something new. We're not upgrading something new here at this point. This is really about kind of the daily operations and retaining and attracting those talented professionals to our village and to keep them here working in that. So, for example, I do know that one thing that some folks are questioning out there is whether or not the Village of Oregon Police Department does need an increased FTE of 3 officers, right? So how do you respond to that question? I think it's a common one I've seen out there. And what evidence then do we have that says, yes, an increase of 3 full-time police officers in this community of this size is necessary? So Martin, you want to tackle that for us?
Yeah, the big driving factor there is the types of calls that our police department is responding to more recently in the last 5, 6, 7 years. So whereas in the past, maybe 10 years ago, it was adequate to have 2 officers on duty for most shifts because they would have availability and they could take calls and that sort of thing. Now we're seeing an increase in 2 officer calls. So these are things like domestic disputes, domestic violence, assaults, violations of court orders, mental health, that sort of thing, where you really need 2 officers there for the safety of the people that are there, but also the safety of the officers themselves. And so what happens is when we have those increasing calls and we have those officers occupied, you get another call, right? And then where does that officer come from? So we have to rely on outside agencies and Dean County sheriffs to be able to, if they have availability, to send somebody to take care of those calls. And so that might be 15 minutes, could be half hour, depending on where people are. And so it really comes down to what is the expectation for residents. So maybe 10 years ago, you could call the police department and you'd have an officer to you within 5 minutes or less.
Right.
And so now, increasingly with the officers occupied, that might change a little bit. Now we're talking maybe 15 minutes or 30 minutes, or we'll call you when we're available and we can set up a time to talk with you. So that's really what this comes down to is residents may have had an expectation or an understanding of the level of service that they were getting from the police department. And by adding these 3 officers, we feel that we can maintain that level of service. Because if we don't, then it's just going to continue to be stretched and stretched and stretched.
And I think perhaps there's maybe a misnomer because I think we have a very visible police department. I see them a lot when we're driving, and I know we never speed in Oregon. I think everybody that lives in Oregon knows that, and we keep it under the speed limit. But I think when we see officers a lot in the community, that's also a good thing, right? And so, but there's going to be times, and you're saying the severity of those calls are often now drawing 2 officers to the scene, and we definitely need to have more backup. We need to have more officers accessible to help others while those calls are happening. So I think that makes sense. I just wonder if some people think, because I see them out in the community all the time, that we don't need any more.
Right. And it limits their ability to be proactive.
Sure.
Right. So like traffic enforcement is a proactive thing. And when officers are tied up, and increasingly more and more tied up, they can't do that proactive traffic. And of course, we do get a lot of complaints about traffic, right? Speeding and reckless driving. And it's good when we are able to do that proactive stuff. But increasingly, we're not going to be able to do that stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think another piece of information, Phil, that we may have is that I think a lot of people have seen the upgrades in the village recently. We've seen the upgrades to the JC Fields and the JC Park, and we've also seen this beautiful new library being built, and now they're saying, well, why do you need 2 new librarians there? Didn't you plan for this? Didn't you plan for this happening? Now, those funds, in my understanding, are not the same as our operating budget. Is that correct? Do you want to address that kind of misinformation?
Yeah, there's really two pockets of money, and one is that there's for capital projects, as you'd mentioned, build a new library, things like that, and that is financed by debt. And while the village has been very frugal about that, and we are in the lower part for a community of our size as far as their debt load. We have a very good bond rating, which determines your
ability to.
Yes, thank you. And but that's one pocket of money. Then there's the money that it's for the annual budget, and that's the day-to-day money. That's the money that keeps the lights on, so to speak. That's how we pay staff. We do facility maintenance, mowing, staffing of the senior center, the library, et cetera, et cetera. To address your point about why weren't we planning for this staff, we certainly knew that there was a possibility that we'd have an increased staffing need at the library. But I think viewers would agree that to go ahead and hire people ahead of time without really knowing if you were going to have the increased need would not be wise as well. So that's why we have seen a significant increase in library traffic, up 60%, in fact. And so, indeed, we need the additional staff. But until that occurred, we were not in a position to make the hires.
Sure. And I think, some people think, well, doesn't the village just need to tighten their belt buckle? And at my house, when times are tough, we have to cut back on these things. How is that kind of metaphor maybe not the best to describe the current situation we're in? Martin, you want to tackle that?
Yeah. So the property, as I mentioned before, the property tax is really our primary source of revenue and for local governments in Wisconsin. That's kind of how it's designed in state law. And the limitation, the kind of the restrictive limitation that I talked about earlier on how we can only increase property taxes for ongoing expenses due to new construction value, that's been in place for about 20 years now. And so we've been in that environment of tightening our belts for the better part of 2 decades. And so that's been the mentality. And so there has been a lot of different things that have been done. There's a lot of places where we've pulled back. There's a lot of places where we've found efficiencies. We've partnered with other governments to share services. We've contracted out services with the private market. So we've been in that world, and we've done quite a lot of different things. And local governments all over Wisconsin have done quite a lot of different things. And so really, what's happening now is we're just getting to a point where we've been in this environment for a long time. And then you have the inflation that's happened, over the last couple of years, and it's creating a dynamic where, Oregon is not unique here. There are a lot of cities and villages who are going to referendum. There's a statistic, between 2006 and about 2020, there's been about 100 municipal referendums over those about 15 years, 12, 15 years. The last 3 years, there's been about 100 already. And so it's affecting not just growing communities, but also communities that aren't growing, and small communities, big communities. We saw City of Madison, but we even saw, Village of Maple Bluff, a community of just 1,000 people, also go for a 22% increase in their levy. So there's a lot of different dynamics that are at play here, and so it's starting to catch up to everybody.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, an issue that compounds is that the state legislator in their budget does have a surplus. Is that correct? And some of that surplus money is intended to be given to municipalities to operate, but that's not the currently working, and that system is not really happening. Is that correct, Phil?
Well, through the state, I think you're speaking to the state shared revenue, and that program came into existence in roughly 2003. And Village's share at that time, we received about $230,000. Now, over the years, that has eroded. In fact, if we were getting the same amount of money as we were in the state legislature from the legislature as we did in 2003, adjusted for inflation, that amount would be $700,000. But last year we received about $400,000 or so. So we are behind in that way. And again, if the legislature would just add an inflation rider to the levy limits, that alone would help quite a bit. And really, it's part of the reason where we are today.
Sure. So there are some other barriers, right, that are kind of in place. So kind of finally now, as we kind of end our segments here together, what opportunities do residents still have in accessing more information beyond the website? I know you have some listening sessions yet still coming up on the calendar. Do you want to talk about those, how people can find information about the times and places and other resources that they might need in order to help make them make their decision?
Yep.
Martin, you want to take this?
Yeah, so we have 3 more information sessions. We just did one yesterday. The next one will be March 4th at 6:30 p.m. in the Village Hall. And there'll be one again at the Senior Center later in March, and then we'll also have another virtual listening session as well late in March. So there'll be 3 opportunities there, and then like you said, we have all the information out on the website. We have contact information if you want to contact me directly, you want to call or email. Happy to answer questions. We'll continue to put more information out in different ways over the next month as well. So the Village's Facebook, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. So there'll be a lot of info out there. We'll also have 2 more mailers that will go out to residents, so we'll get some additional information that way.
And what kind of format is that listening session? Is it pretty informal? Do you do a presentation? Is there a time for Village residents to ask questions?
Yes, typically, the format is that we'll do an information session at the beginning of it, and Martin actually does a great job of doing that, and that lasts, about half the session, and then we reserve the other half for question and answers.
Okay.
And we did have one, as Martin had yesterday, and we had a very good turnout. We have residents that ask good questions, but I think it's very effective, and I think people, if they would attend, they would find it be very useful.
And as kind of down to brass tacks, like you can look at a sample ballot online. I think it's myvotewisconsin.gov, I believe. And this is a yes or no question on the ballot, correct? If you support the referendum, you click the yes. If you do not support the referendum, you click the no. So there's no confusion about how to kind of vote for this, and make sure that you check out that ballot ahead of time so you know what's all on there, because it is going to be an important spring election, not just for the Village of Oregon, but for the state as a whole. Correct. So, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you on today, and thank you for coming back and taking the time to discuss this really timely and important topic. And I hope that things work out for you, and I hope that Oregon retains its staff and is a great place to call home, and still is that great place to call home after the April election too. So
thank you very much.
Thanks
Mike.
for coming, and we'll see you next month in March with hopefully some warmer weather and some springtime joy. We'll see you next time here on Let's Talk Oregon.